you recognize this. I think you've used this before. Bankster's Paradise. This is one of Edward's mashups. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Edward, the Renegade investor.
Well, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Thank you. Can you just bear me 1 second? Just going to bring this up.
Sorry, Ed, I thought you were ready to go.
No, I'm just about there. Okay. Right, let's have a look. Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for everyone for coming today to watch the talks, and thank you for having me here. And yeah, as I was introduced, my name is Edward. I'm also known as Renegade Investor Online, and you can find me here on my social media. So on Twitter or X, I'm known as @SharkyBit, and on YouTube, I'm known as Renegade Investor. And just a little bit of background about myself. So I've had 13 years experience as an investor, mainly focusing on macroeconomics. So I'm looking at the big global picture of what is happening in the world on a geopolitic or a financial level to look at what global trends are happening and how that affects different assets. And the one that I've focused on the most is Bitcoin. I absolutely love Bitcoin. I've been living and breathing Bitcoin every day for about 11 years. And I think it's the one thing in the world right now when so many bad things are happening with our governments, where there's no representation, there's a lot of financial problems in the world. I think Bitcoin is the one thing where there is just so much optimism. It's the one thing I think which is actually like some of the light in the world. And one of the things I think is going to save us from a dystopian future of control. So 11 years I've been in Bitcoin. And the funny thing is, I was actually 30 when I first got into Bitcoin. And on my 30th birthday, one of my friends actually baked me a amazing Bitcoin cake. And to thank her, I actually gave her half a Bitcoin at the time, which was about $30. And now it's $30,000. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. And they've actually still got it. And I've managed to sort of hold them off from actually selling it. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, because when you hear crazy stuff like this, like something's gone from $30 to $30,000 in 10 years, then why should I still invest in Bitcoin if it's already gone up so much? Like, surely this is a saturated market, everybody's already invested, and all the big gains are gone. But what I want to talk to you about today is exactly why that is not the case. Like, Bitcoin is still in the early days, and there is still humongous gains to be made on this market. Okay, so just so you know, I've actually taken this talk from partly from a video that I've just done online. So you can get this at my YouTube channel. So I know I'm going to go through a lot of stuff today, but if it's too much, you can always go back to this video and it explains it in a lot more detail, and you can consume it in your own time. The other thing I want to say is, I'm not a qualified financial advisor. All the information I give you today is purely what I personally believe, about Bitcoin. And although I think it's all correct, make your own decisions, do your own due diligence, and, talk to whatever financial advisors you need to make an informed decision for yourself. Why should I buy Bitcoin if the price has already gone up so much? And so today I want to talk to you about why Bitcoin is still the ultimate investment in 2024. So I think the thing to understand about Bitcoin is the investment proposition is, imagine if you could have bought equity in the internet in the early, 1990s. That's where we are with Bitcoin. It's the first time that you can make an investment in a decentralized open source network. And it's not like you're buying something on top of the network, like with the internet, where you could invest in Amazon stocks or eBay stocks or PayPal or something like that. Imagine you could have bought an actual part of the infrastructure of the internet. Because the internet is now worth, how many trillions? No one can even really calculate it. But imagine you could have had a share of that. And that is what Bitcoin is promising as an investment. And I think as more services and businesses grow on top of the network, we are going to see the value of the Bitcoin token go beyond what anyone really thought, I think, was realistic. So when you look at the returns on investment that Bitcoin's had already, they're absolutely astronomical. So going back to, I think realistically 2012, because at the beginning they were worth such a few pence. It's really hard to calculate, but 670,000% increase since 2012 is absolutely crazy. It's not only one of the best investments in human history. But it's taking, it's almost like these returns are absolutely unheard of. So it's like, if we've already had such big returns, then why would we still want to invest? And I think the first thing we need to look at is adoption. So when investment has gone up a lot, it's sometimes called a saturated trade, and it's called a saturated trade when everybody is already invested in the market. Therefore, there's nobody else to come in and buy the asset that you have yourself. Whereas with this, if we actually look at the amount of people that are invested all over the world, it's about 325 to 425 million people. Now, if we compare this to internet adoption, and I think that's a really good comparison to make, because the internet is obviously another open source decentralized network that decentralizes information, whereas Bitcoin is obviously decentralizing money and finance. But if we compare it to the internet, Bitcoin's currently at around 8% global adoption, which is actually still pretty tiny when you think about 5 billion people are currently using the internet, and we're only at a 10 for that. So that puts us at around the year 2000 in terms of adoption, in terms of the internet. And that was right before we had the massive social media blow up of the early 2000s, which really onboarded so many people into Bitcoin. So I think from a adoption perspective, we're still in the early days in Bitcoin. And if you compare it as well to other technologies, like smartphones, tablets, you can see that when a technology really goes viral, really goes global, the rate of adoption is absolutely colossal, and you see these massive rises to prominence until almost everybody is using it. And as you can see on the right there, Bitcoin is still in the early days. We're still around sort of 8%. So I think a lot of that growth in terms of user adoption is still yet to come for Bitcoin. And another way to look at this is called the S-curve adoption model, and it basically gives us a way to visualize that adoption on a graph. And if we look where Bitcoin is on the yellow circle, we're still in that early adopter stage, and it really gets fun when we get to the earning majority stage. And this is where price can really go exponential. When we hit that point, it's called the hockey stick or the J-curve, and that is where the price can really go exponential, shooting up. And I think we still haven't hit that point with Bitcoin yet. I think we're getting much closer, especially with the approval of the ETS, which I think is really going to drive adoption. But I think we're getting very close to that point where we do see exponential adoption and growth in the Bitcoin price. So what is going to continue driving that adoption? And so these are the sort of six big trends I think are going to continue to bring people into the space. So obviously, the first one is inflation. This is the biggest driver of Bitcoin adoption. And the reason for that is because Bitcoin is a store of value when every other government in the world is devaluing their currencies. And this is the first time in human history where we have an unprecedented situation where every single major fiat government currency in the world is being hyperinflated at the same time. And I actually say hyperinflation because I think mathematically that is where we are heading without any major intervention. So obviously, biggest trend that is driving Bitcoin right now. The second is a decentralization zeitgeist where, in the whole 20th century, it was all about centralization, whether it be in the media, in governments, in super states. Everything got massively centralized. And it was the Bitcoin that really broke that in the 90s. It started to decentralize information. And now Bitcoin is coming along to really decentralize money and finance. And I think ultimately it will decentralize the state as well. The unstoppable digital trend, so everything has become digital. It's obvious that money itself will become digital. And I know we have digital currencies, but this is the first time that we actually have digital money. And increasing loss of freedoms. I think we can all agree that, governments and big international institutions, like every day are thinking up new ways of how to strip us of our freedoms. And I think one of the ones that's coming up that looks really dodgy is the central bank digital currencies, which is the antithesis of what Bitcoin is. They're trying to create all these different rules and regulations on how and when you can spend your money. They will also be inflationary. It will probably come with a social credit score and a lot of surveillance. And so Bitcoin is so important because, with Bitcoin, I think these things are actually going to be down the arrival. Even though they're going to try them, Bitcoin is going to push back on that. And I think the other thing driving Bitcoin is just retribution. Which sounds crazy, but there's been so little accountability and responsibility following the 2008 financial crisis. At the end, they just paid themselves bonuses out of taxpayers' money. No one went to jail. And I think the big thing, especially for myself, is just Bitcoin is like accountability for everything that happened. And so for me, retribution is part of that. It's as Bitcoin is pushing that accountability for what should have happened after the 2008 crisis. And another big one is the end of the 40-year bond bull market, which I'm going to talk more on in a minute. So, I think we're going to see a lot of money moving from bonds, which is one of the biggest markets in the world, into Bitcoin. So, another way to measure whether Bitcoin is currently overvalued, or why should I buy Bitcoin if it's already gone up so much? I think another reason to look at is just how much money is already invested in Bitcoin. At the moment, it's only $1 trillion, which sounds like a lot, but when you look at the amount of money that is in all other major asset classes in the world, it's absolutely a drop in the ocean. And I think we're going to continue to see capital move from other markets right into Bitcoin. So I think the first market that is in major danger of being demonetized by Bitcoin, or we're going to see capital flows from Bitcoin, from it into Bitcoin, is the gold market. And the gold market itself is around $13 trillion right now, and Bitcoin is $1 trillion, so 13 times bigger than the Bitcoin market. But Bitcoin is the first new money in 2,600 years. This is a massive change. The first time gold was used as money, we were like in 500 BC. So this is the biggest change in money in 2,600 years. And the reason I think we're going to see so much capital move from gold into Bitcoin is the fact that Bitcoin is just superior money. It's better in every single attribute, whether it's fungible, divisible, portable. It's much easier to store. It's gold is much harder to transport. So in every way, Bitcoin is more suitable for the digital age. Gold was the money of the analog industrial age, but Bitcoin is just superior money for the digital age. And on top of that, we've seen a lot of manipulation in the gold and silver markets, which I think has massively benefited Bitcoin because people just got fed up with the fact that there's a lot of fake precious metal contracts being created, which increases the supply and suppresses the price. And I think a lot of people, instead of being upset with just having little gains in the precious metal markets over the last 10 years, they've gone into Bitcoin. I think that's going to continue. And yeah, like I said, if Bitcoin absolutely demonetized gold, we could see a Bitcoin price of around $850,000 per coin, and that's purely for the gold market. So next up is global stock markets, which is 109 trillion. So these markets are just getting bigger and bigger as we talk about them. Another way of looking at that would be like if the stock markets were worth £1.09, then Bitcoin would be worth 1 penny. So you can really get the scale of just how small Bitcoin is compared to these other major markets. And I think another reason why we're going to see money move from stocks into Bitcoin is the fact that it's going to become more and more risk in the global economy when the inflation increases, because that's going to put massive pressure on on global economies and domestic ones. And I think when that happens, you get something called risk. You move from a risk-on environment to a risk-off. So when everything is good in the economy, investors are much more happy to have a risk-on, to put their money into risk assets. Whereas when you get risk-off, people are looking to preserve their capital when there could be a major economic shock coming. And I think that's what's going to happen as fiat currencies start to fail. And so I think, Bitcoin's kind of unique in the sense that it is both a risk-on and a risk-off asset. But I think ultimately it's going to end up as a major risk-off asset, and people are going to use it to protect themselves. And so that's one of the main reasons. The other is that when you sell a stock, you're getting back fiat currency. If you sell a stock, you either get dollars or pounds back or whatever currency. And I think what's going to happen is when people sell these and they get dollars or pounds back that are inflating away in value, they're actually going to think, well, I'd actually rather hold Bitcoin, because at least then the underlying currency that this being held in is not getting devalued. So ultimately, I think Bitcoin is also going to just massively outcompete stocks in terms of its return on investment. And so, yeah, if Bitcoin took just 5% of the global stock market, which isn't unrealistic. Imagine if, that's just like a person with a stock portfolio going, I'll hedge in 5% Bitcoin. Then the Bitcoin price would be at $359,000 per coin, purely with just a 5% movement out of that one market. So this is the big one. So global bond markets. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with bonds, but if you're not, a bond is simply a loan where the issuer is a debtor and the buyer is a creditor. So if you buy a government bond, you are loaning the government money, and in return, the government becomes a debtor and they have to pay you back at some point. And a bond has both a face value and a coupon or an interest rate. So the problem with bonds right now is inflation. Inflation is the worst enemy of bonds. And the reason for that is bonds are denominated in dollars again. So when a bond matures, you're going to be getting paid back in devalued currency. And not only that, the central banks are in a no-win situation right now. So they've got two options, okay? So they either don't print money right now in order to buy bonds. And then if they do that, interest rates are going to skyrocket, which is going to absolutely crash the economy. And on top of that, bonds are absolutely going to sell off and lose value. And so anyone holding bonds is then going to think, well, I need to protect myself. So I'm going to sell some bonds. And they might decide to sell bonds and actually move it into Bitcoin, which is probably going to have a higher return on investment anyway. The other option that central banks are going to do is they print hundreds of trillions of dollars in order to support the bond market. So bond prices will technically go up, but they're going to have to print so much money to do that in order to lower interest rates that it will literally send us into hyperinflation. And if that happens, anyone holding bonds anyway is going to be worried about the actual return of the face value of the bond. So either way, either scenario, it's a win-win situation for Bitcoin. And like I said, if we see just 5% of the global bond market go into Bitcoin, that would give it a price of 438,500 purely based on a 5% move out of that one market. The next one is global real estate. So the reason we have seen so much money flow into real estate was really after the 2008 crisis when the central banks decided to manipulate interest rates really low. So anybody with a savings account would find it incredibly difficult to get a return on investment, especially sort of older people that relied on that as a source of income in old age. So everybody started chasing real estate as a way to get a higher return on investment. And if we look at the size of this market, we're looking at 93 trillion, and that's broken down into both commercial residential real estate, which is things like people that invest in properties more as an investment, so like your second homes, and also people that do buy to let, things like that. And the second side is the global commercial real estate, which is, like big office spaces and things along those lines. But both of these are in direct risk of being demonetized by Bitcoin. The reason for that on the residential side is there's just so many new regulations and rules from government who are always meddling. They're always as well trying to protect tenants at the moment. So we saw this during COVID where, they almost made it illegal to get rid of tenants even if they're not paying rent, which then puts you at massive risk that if you're owning a property that you could lose it. You could lose your mortgage could default and you could lose your property. So again, it's a massive risk for people as all these new regulations come into place to make your life hard. On top of that, inflation is running so high that the actual cost of maintenance of trying to deal with real estate is just going up and up. So whether that's labor costs or material costs for doing repairs, it's just getting more and more expensive. The overheads are getting greater and greater for owning property. And on top of that, you've then got agency fees, contracts, and the actual time taken to do all of this overhead to maintain a property and deal with tenants. On the commercial side, you've got more and more people working from home since COVID. And secondly, again, more government regulations. More and more people just aren't starting companies because there's just so many regulations that you have to adhere to. And a lot of people that already have companies are not growing them further because you then get into really stupid regulations like diversity hiring and things like that, and massive human resource requirements, which then makes it almost like pointless to make your company bigger, which would then take up more office space. So I think as these things really bite, the truth is that Bitcoin is going to be outcompeting the return on investments in these assets. And, the overheads of owning Bitcoin is like you have your account on a hardware wallet, you've got no costs, no time, no maintenance costs. It's so easy to hold, and the investments and the actual return on investment could be multiples of what you see in property. So I think as people put two and two together, they'll think, well, why don't I diversify out of global real estate and into Bitcoin? And I think, like I said, 5% of this market goes into Bitcoin. You're looking at a price of $306,000 per coin just for this one market as well. So next one as well. So last big market we're going to look at is, global money supply. And this is a bit of a no-brainer as well. So this is all the coins, banknotes, your money market accounts, saving accounts, anything that is like liquid cash, basically. And it doesn't matter where you have cash. It doesn't matter whether it's in the bank, under your mattress, it's getting inflated away. It's just cash is probably the worst thing in the world that you can hold right now. And so why is all this money, and this is an 82.6 trillion market, which is absolutely huge. Why is all this money going to go into Bitcoin? So again, like I talked about earlier, inflation is just going to get worse and worse, and Bitcoin is the inflation hedge. Every other single fiat currency in human history has gone to zero, with no exceptions. So there's no reason. I know it's hard for people to actually think about a Western currency defaulting and hyperinflating, but this is where we're at. This is a mathematical certainty on the path that we are on. And so I think more and more people are going to realize this, especially as prices go up and inflation goes up and their money buys less and less. And again, if you're holding cash and you're only getting, say, I don't know, 2-3% in the bank account, and inflation's running 9%, you're actually just losing, 6 or 7% a year just by holding your cash. So it just makes, it's going to make less and less sense to hold cash. Even now, it's almost pointless, but it's just going to get worse and worse. And so, Bitcoin is reintroducing a savings vehicle. So it's the first time in ages that people can actually have money in the bank and actually make a really good return on investment. I say in the bank, it's definitely not in the bank, but it's the first time in ages that people have actually going to be able to have savings and actually make a return off it. It turns you into a really frugal saver. And again, I think over time, Bitcoin is going to replace all fiat currencies. I mean, it's going to take some time, but I really believe that Bitcoin can do that. But in the meantime, if it took 10% of this market, which I think is realistic in the near term, then that would add, $500,000 to the price of Bitcoin. And, like I said, currently Bitcoin is only $66,000 per coin. So when we add all this up, Bitcoin is a $1 trillion market cap, and the entire value of all the global assets that I talked about is $430 trillion. So, if we take all the zeros out, that's like the entire global economy is worth £4.30, and Bitcoin is worth 1p. So it really shows you Bitcoin is still so early in its adoption, in the amount of capital that's flowed into it. And as a percentage of global assets, it's still only 0.23%, which is tiny. Like it's hard to even think about when you think how much the price has gone up and how much it could. So if we add up all those numbers that I did, that would be around $2.4 million per coin, which sounds crazy, but even that could be conservative in the long run, because if we see something like hyper-Bitcoinization, which is where we see an event, like the way I see hyper-Bitcoinization happening is if every single major fiat currency starts to hyperinflate, the amount of capital that is going to be going looking for a home in Bitcoin is going to be so colossal. We could see a quarter of the global economy going into Bitcoin. So it's just colossal. It's hard to even, I can't get your head around. Even like when I've been in it 11 years, I still have to think to myself, is this realistic? But when you run the numbers, it is. And if you think this is hyperbole, you've got to remember as well that the US government alone is printing $1 trillion every 100 days. That's $3 to $4 trillion per year. And that's just one government. And that's the entire Bitcoin market cap. The amount of money invested in Bitcoin is being printed by the US government every 100 days. So this is why I believe that Bitcoin is still the most undervalued asset on the face of the planet, despite the fact it's the best performing asset on the face of the planet. It's unprecedented, really. And and the other thing to really understand is that Bitcoin has inelastic supply, okay? So it doesn't matter how much money is, how much demand there is for Bitcoin. No more Bitcoin can be created, whereas every other asset in the world, I'll come on to this in a sec. I probably should have clicked on. But, anything like gold, real estate, the more money that goes into it, the more people create of it. More houses are built, more gold is extracted from the ground. With Bitcoin, that is mathematically impossible. So we can have record-breaking, unprecedented demand for Bitcoin, and the price, then no more of it can be created. It's just, it's one of the only things in the world which has inelastic supply. How long have we got? Can I ask?
1 more minute.
1 more minute. Oh, my God. Anyway, so I think that's the big picture view. But if we were going to look at where we are in this cycle, I think over the years, Bitcoin has been in a 4-year cycle, which is always catalyzed by the halvening. So the halvening cuts the supply of Bitcoin by 50%, and there's one coming up in a couple of weeks, and it only happens once every 4 years. And this creates a cycle where which breaks it down into 5 stages, okay? So after a massive sell-off, which we saw in 2022, the market goes into a stage of accumulation where the price just goes sideways. And then eventually, like we saw at the beginning or at the end of last year, it breaks out of that trend and runs up to the previous all-time highs, which is where we are now. So if I was going to say where we are right now, I think we are currently just sort of in the middle to latter part of the stage 2 of this market cycle, which means that if we break that all-time high, we're going to go into stage 3 and stage 4 where we see the even bigger gains and the trend starts to speed off until we get to that parabolic blow off top before another bear market. So in terms of like investing in this cycle, I still think we're sort of maybe not even quite halfway through the trend, but getting there. But I think there's still some massive gains to come. But like I said, if you do make an investment in Bitcoin, I always just recommend just hold it long term, get it in a hardware wallet, get off exchanges, and that way you can't really go wrong. Just if people that sort of get caught out are the ones that really try to time the market, especially when you don't have experience doing that. So, treat it as a long-term investment. I think there's going to be still generational wealth and life-changing gains to be made. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edward. That was fascinating. I mean, how bullish was that? And because you're so bullish, I have so many questions, but I'm not going to open the floor to questions just because we're running a little bit late. So no, not your fault. We'll blame Ben. Ed, are you sticking around for the rest of the day?
If anyone wants to ask you a question, then come up to me.
Fantastic. Do tap Ed up for if you have more questions. I have a load of questions, but thank you so much, Ed. I love the fact that if your predictions are right, that cake that you bought a few years ago is going to be worth over $1 million. Fantastic. I love it. Round of applause for Ed. Thank you very much.